The millionaire's son is drowning, and only the janitor's sick 7-year-old daughter jumps in to save him. The millionaire surprised everyone with what he did next. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. The afternoon sun cast golden ripples across the crystal-clear water of the Patterson Estate's Olympic-sized pool. 7-year-old Tommy Patterson ran along the marble deck, his designer swim trunks dripping as he chased a beach ball that had rolled toward the deep end. Behind him, the massive Georgian mansion stood like a monument to his father's success. James Patterson, the tech mogul whose company had revolutionized cloud computing. "Tommy, slow down," called Elena Rodriguez from the pool house where she was folding fresh towels. As the head housekeeper, she'd watched this little boy grow up over the past 3 years, and his reckless energy always made her nervous. But Tommy was already reaching for the ball when his wet feet hit the slippery stone. Time seemed to freeze as he tumbled forward, his arms windmilling desperately. The splash echoed across the courtyard like a gunshot. The water was 12 feet deep at that end, far too deep for a 7-year-old who was still learning to swim. Tommy's head bobbed once, twice, then disappeared beneath the surface. Panic seized Elena's chest as she saw the small form sinking like a stone. "Help! Someone help!" she screamed, but the pool area was isolated from the main house. James was in his study on an important conference call. The other staff were inside preparing dinner. Elena couldn't swim. She'd grown up in poverty in El Salvador and never had the chance to learn. That's when Sarah Rodriguez appeared. The pale, thin 7-year-old had been resting in the shade of the pool house, trying to conserve her energy as the doctors had instructed. Sarah suffered from a rare genetic condition that weakened her heart and lungs, requiring constant medication and frequent hospital visits. Her father, Tom, the estate's head groundskeeper, often brought her to work when she was too sick for school. Without hesitation, Sarah threw herself into the deep water, her frail body cut through the pool like a determined arrow. Elena watched in terror as both children disappeared beneath the surface. Sarah's heart condition made any physical exertion dangerous. Swimming 12 feet down could kill her. Seconds felt like hours. The water remained still and ominous. Then Sarah's dark head broke the surface, gasping, with Tommy's unconscious form in her arms. She was barely keeping them both afloat, her face grey with exhaustion, but she kicked desperately toward the shallow end. Elena waded in as far as she dared, stretching her arms out. "Sarah, here!" The little girl pushed Tommy toward Elena's reaching hands, just as her own strength gave out. She slipped under again, her small body disappearing into the blue depths. Elena dragged Tommy to the pool's edge and began pumping water from his lungs, just as she'd seen on television. He coughed violently and opened his eyes, crying for his daddy. "Sarah!" Elena screamed, scanning the water frantically. That's when James Patterson burst through the pool house doors, his expensive suit forgotten, his phone call abandoned. He'd heard Elena's screams from his study window. In one fluid motion, he dove into the pool fully clothed and pulled Sarah's limp form from the bottom. As he carried the unconscious girl to the poolside, performing CPR with the skill of someone who'd taken emergency training, one thought pounded through his mind. This dying child had just saved his son's life. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, and she whispered weakly, "Is Tommy okay?" James Patterson, worth $800 million, looked down at the groundskeeper's daughter, this brave, selfless little girl who'd risked everything for his child, and made a decision that would shock everyone who knew him. But what he did next would change both families forever. James Patterson's hands trembled as he wrapped Sarah in his expensive cashmere coat, the fabric worth more than most people's monthly salary. The paramedics had stabilized her, but her lips were still blue, her breathing shallow and labored. Tom Rodriguez knelt beside his daughter, tears streaming down his weathered face. his work clothes still damp from his desperate attempt to help. "Sir, I'm so sorry," Tom whispered, his voice breaking. "She shouldn't have been near the pool. I know the rules about keeping her away from your private areas. I'll pack our things tonight and—" "Stop." James's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. He looked at this humble man who'd maintained his grounds for 5 years with quiet dignity, whose daughter had just saved Tommy's life without a moment's hesitation. "You're not going anywhere. Not ever." The hospital waiting room fell silent as James made his announcement to the assembled staff and his ex-wife Margaret, who'd rushed over from her Beacon Hill mansion, her designer heels clicking against the sterile floor. Elena Rodriguez clutched her rosary beads, praying in rapid Spanish. Mrs. O'Brien, the cook, sat rigid with worry. Even the estate's security team had come to check on the little girl who'd somehow captured everyone's hearts. "I'm paying for Sarah's medical treatment, all of it. Whatever she needs, wherever we need to go, whatever it costs." Margaret's perfectly manicured nails dug into her Hermes purse, her face a mask of controlled shock. "James, that's very generous, but surely their insurance covers basic care." "They don't have insurance that covers experimental treatments," James interrupted, his voice steel. "I've already called Dr. Harrison at Boston Children's Hospital. Sarah will get the best care money can buy. I've also contacted specialists in Switzerland and Germany." Tom's face crumpled, overwhelmed by gratitude and disbelief. "Mr. Patterson, I can't accept such charity. I'm just the groundskeeper. I could never repay—" "You can and you will accept it." James's tone brooked no argument. "Your daughter saved my son's life. She risked everything, her weak heart, her fragile lungs, to save a boy she barely knew. I won't forget that sacrifice, ever." But as the medical team wheeled Sarah toward the cardiac unit, her small hand reaching out for Tommy's, James found himself making an even more surprising decision. He pulled Tom aside, away from Margaret's disapproving glare and the whispered conversations of the staff. "Move into the guest house, tomorrow, you and Sarah." The words hung in the air like a challenge to everything Margaret and their wealthy friends believed about proper boundaries between employer and employee. Tom's eyes widened in shock, then filled with tears he tried desperately to hide. "Sir, that's too much. What will people say?" "Let them talk," James said firmly, watching through the window as Tommy refused to leave Sarah's bedside despite the late hour. "Some things matter more than what people say." Margaret Patterson had been James's wife for 8 tumultuous years and his ex-wife for 2 more. She understood the intricate rules of Boston's elite social circle better than anyone, who belonged, who didn't, and the invisible lines that must never be crossed. And James was obliterating every single one of those lines. "You can't be serious," she hissed as they stood in the hospital corridor, her voice low but venomous. "Moving the help into the guest house? James, what will people think? The Worthingtons, the Cabots, the entire country club set. They'll ostracize you, ostracize Tommy." "I don't care what people think." James watched through the window as Tommy sat beside Sarah's hospital bed, holding her pale hand and whispering stories about his toy cars, his face more animated than Margaret had seen since before the divorce. "Look at them, Margaret. Really look." Something profound was happening between the 2 children that transcended their different worlds. Tommy, who'd been withdrawn and angry since the divorce, throwing tantrums and refusing to connect with anyone, was suddenly animated and protective. Sarah, despite her weakness and the frightening array of medical equipment surrounding her, smiled more in Tommy's presence than Tom had seen in months. Dr. Harrison approached with Sarah's test results, his expression grave and professional. "Mr. Patterson, Mrs. Patterson, I need to be completely honest with you about Sarah's condition. The tests reveal that her cardiomyopathy is more advanced than we initially thought. without the new gene therapy treatment currently in trials. "Whatever it costs," James said immediately, not even waiting to hear the price. "It's experimental. No insurance company will cover it. We're talking about $2 million initially, possibly $4 million over the course of treatment, and even then, there are no guarantees." Margaret gasped audibly, her hand flying to her throat. Tom went pale, swaying slightly as the enormous figure hit him like a physical blow, but James didn't hesitate, didn't even blink. "Do it. Start immediately. Money is no object." As they drove home that evening in James's Bentley, Margaret's silence was more dangerous than her arguments. The luxury car felt suffocating as tension filled every inch of space between them. Finally, she spoke, her voice deadly quiet. "You realize what you're doing, don't you? You're destroying your reputation, your social standing, everything we built together, for a sick child who isn't even yours." James gripped the steering wheel tighter, his knuckles white. "No, Margaret. I'm saving the child who saved our son. I'm doing what any decent human being would do. Decent human beings don't give away millions to the help's children. They express gratitude, maybe pay for basic treatment, then move on with their lives." But James didn't tell her about the phone call he'd made from the hospital bathroom while Sarah was being examined. The call to his lawyer about changing his will, about setting up trust funds, about ensuring Sarah's future regardless of what happened to him. Because Sarah Rodriguez had shown him something that night. True courage, selfless love, the kind of character he desperately wanted his own son to learn. And that realization was about to turn everyone's world completely upside down. The guest house on the Patterson estate was larger and more luxurious than any home Tom Rodriguez had ever imagined living in, let alone calling his own. 3 spacious bedrooms, 2 marble bathrooms, a gourmet kitchen with granite countertops and floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of the manicured gardens he'd maintained for years from the outside looking in. As he carried Sarah's few belongings inside, a battered teddy bear, some worn picture books, her medications in a small cooler, he felt like an imposter in someone else's dream. "Daddy, it's like a palace," Sarah whispered, her voice still weak from the hospital stay but filled with wonder. She was supposed to rest, doctor's orders, but her eyes were bright with amazement as she explored her new room. Complete with a bay window overlooking the rose garden, built-in bookshelves, and a canopy bed that looked like something from a fairy tale. Tommy bounded in behind them, his energy infectious and boundless. "Sarah!" "Mum said you can watch movies on the big screen TV in the living room, and there's a whole library upstairs with thousands of books, and maybe when you're feeling better, we can build the most amazing fort in the woods behind the pond." Margaret watched this scene from the main house's French doors, her jaw clenched so tightly her teeth ached. She'd tried everything, reasoning with James about proper social boundaries, threatening him with their friend's judgment, even attempting to bribe Tom to refuse the generous offer. Nothing had worked. "This is temporary," she told herself, pacing her marble foyer. "James will come to his senses once the novelty wears off." But as days passed, something beautiful and troubling began to unfold. Tommy spent every possible moment with Sarah, reading to her from his extensive collection of adventure books, showing her his room full of expensive toys he'd never truly appreciated, even sharing his favorite breakfast cereal at the small table in the guest house kitchen. The lonely, angry boy was disappearing, replaced by a protective, caring child Margaret barely recognized as her own flesh and blood. Sarah, despite her illness and frequent fatigue, bloomed under the attention like a flower finally receiving sunlight. Her laughter echoed through the estate for the first time in anyone's memory. Even the stern cook, Mrs. O'Brien, found herself making Sarah's favorite chocolate chip cookies and teaching her traditional Irish lullabies her own grandmother had sung. Tom worked harder than ever, grateful beyond words but struggling with the complex dynamics. The other estate workers whispered about favoritism and impropriety. Some respected his daughter's heroism and the family's new circumstances. Others resented the special treatment and muttered about people forgetting their place in the world. It was during Sarah's third week in the guest house that James made another shocking announcement at their formal Sunday dinner. "I've enrolled Tommy in Sarah's school." Margaret dropped her silver fork with a clatter that echoed through the dining room. "What? James? He goes to Brookshire Academy. It's the finest private school in Boston, with connections that will serve him his entire life. He's going to Lincoln Elementary with Sarah. That's a public school in a working-class neighborhood." That's where Sarah goes when she's well enough to attend. Tommy needs to understand how the other half lives, how real families struggle and triumph." Margaret's face flushed with rage and disbelief. "You're ruining his chances, James. His future, his opportunities, everything we've worked to give him. His future includes understanding that heroism doesn't come with trust funds and character isn't something you can inherit." But what James didn't reveal was the real reason for his decision. Dr. Harrison had pulled him aside that morning with devastating news about Sarah's prognosis. The gene therapy was working, but slowly, too slowly. Sarah might have months, not years. And James Patterson, the man who could buy anything in the world, realized he couldn't buy the one thing that mattered most: time. 3 months after the pool incident that had changed all their lives, James Patterson sat in Dr. Harrison's oak-paneled office, receiving news that would shatter everything he thought he knew about courage, love, and the precious nature of time. "The gene therapy is showing promise, Dr. Tim," Harrison said carefully, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed Sarah's thick medical file. "Her heart function has stabilized somewhat, and the cellular regeneration markers are encouraging, but... James's voice was barely audible, his hands gripping the leather arms of his chair. "Sarah's heart is weaker than we initially hoped. The damage from years of undiagnosed cardiomyopathy is more extensive than our first tests revealed. The treatment is buying us time, but how much time?" The words felt like broken glass in James's throat. "With aggressive treatment, the best specialists, unlimited resources, possibly 2 years, maybe 3 if we're very fortunate. Without continued intervention." The doctor's silence spoke volumes that no amount of money could rewrite. James felt the floor disappear beneath him. This brilliant, brave little girl who'd saved his son, who'd brought joy back into Tommy's life, who'd made him remember what truly mattered in a world of quarterly reports and stock options. She was dying, and all his wealth couldn't change that fundamental fact. Meanwhile, at Lincoln Elementary, Tommy was experiencing his own profound revelation. For the first time in his privileged, sheltered life, he saw children wearing thrift store clothes with pride, sharing single sandwiches for lunch because that was all their families could afford, and walking to school in worn-out shoes because their parents couldn't afford cars. "Why don't they have what we have?" he asked Sarah during recess as they sat on a bench, watching a classmate get teased by other children for his patched backpack and faded jeans. Sarah, sitting quietly to preserve her energy as the doctors had instructed, looked at him with wisdom far beyond her 7 years. "Money doesn't make people good, Tommy. My dad always says character is what you do when no one's watching, when there's nothing in it for you except knowing you did right." That afternoon, Tommy shocked his teacher, Mrs. Williams, by giving away his elaborate packed lunch to a hungry classmate and standing up to bullies picking on the boy with worn shoes. The privileged child was learning lessons no amount of money could teach, lessons about dignity and kindness that would shape the man he would one day become. But it was Mrs. Williams who noticed something else entirely. She'd been teaching for 30 years and had never seen a child face serious illness with such grace and genuine concern for others. Sarah tutored struggling classmates despite her own fatigue, shared her art supplies freely without expectation of return, and never complained about her frequent absences for medical appointments that everyone knew were fighting for her life. "That little girl has something extraordinary, Mrs. Williams told her husband that evening as they washed dishes in their modest kitchen. "In all my years teaching, I've never met a child with such character, such selfless courage." What she didn't know was that Sarah kept a secret journal hidden under her mattress where she wrote letters to Tommy's future. Letters about being brave when the world seemed dark, about helping others even when you had little to give, about the things that really mattered in life beyond money and status. Because Sarah Rodriguez, at 7 years old, understood something adults often forgot in their busy, complicated lives, that time was the most precious gift of all. And in the Patterson mansion, James was making a decision that would ensure Sarah's letters and her extraordinary spirit would never be forgotten. On a cold November evening, with snow beginning to dust the perfectly manicured lawns of his estate, James Patterson called his attorney with instructions that would make headlines across Boston's elite social circles and send shockwaves through the entire New England establishment. "I want to change my will," he said, standing in his mahogany-paneled study overlooking the guest house where Sarah was patiently teaching Tommy to play chess despite her trembling hands and growing fatigue. "Of course, Mr. Patterson. What modifications would you like to make?" Robert Whitman had been the Patterson family attorney for 15 years, handling everything from business acquisitions to the divorce settlement. He'd seen James make impulsive decisions before, but nothing had prepared him for what came next. "Sarah Rodriguez is to inherit $50 million upon my death, with Tom Rodriguez as trustee until she turns 18. If she doesn't survive to adulthood, the money goes to pediatric heart research in her name, specifically funding the gene therapy that's treating her condition." The silence on the other end was deafening. Finally, Attorney Whitman found his voice, shock evident in every syllable. "Sir, that's a substantial sum for someone who isn't family. Are you certain about this decision? She saved my son's life. More than that, she's teaching him how to live it with purpose and compassion." Lynn, what James didn't say was the rest of his plan, the comprehensive strategy he'd been quietly developing. He'd been setting up multiple trust funds that would ensure Sarah's medical care for life, regardless of his own fate. He'd also been investigating the finest specialists in Switzerland, Germany, and Japan, places where experimental treatments might buy precious additional time. That same evening, Margaret arrived for her weekly dinner with Tommy, a court-mandated arrangement she endured rather than enjoyed. The sight that greeted her through the guest house window stopped her cold and sent an unexpected stab of pain through her chest. Tommy, Sarah, and Tom Rodriguez sat around the modest kitchen table, sharing a simple meal of homemade soup and bread, laughing together with genuine joy and affection. They looked like a real family, something she and James had never managed to create, despite all their wealth and advantages. "She's dying, isn't she?" Margaret asked James later that evening, her voice uncharacteristically quiet as they stood in his study. James nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. "And you're in love with them, with that family, with what they represent?" It wasn't a question. Margaret had finally understood what she was really fighting against, not social convention or impropriety, but genuine love and connection that her wealth and status had never been able to create or buy. "Tommy's happier than he's ever been," James said simply, watching his son through the window as he carefully helped Sarah back to her room. "They've given him something we never could with all our money and connections." "What's that?" "A reason to be better than he has to be, to care about something beyond himself." But what neither of them knew was that Sarah had overheard Dr. Harrison's devastating prognosis during her last appointment, when she'd pretended to sleep while the adults discussed her future in hushed, worried tones. The brave little girl who'd saved Tommy from drowning was now fighting desperately to save something even more precious: the time she had left to make sure Tommy would remember every lesson she was teaching him about courage, kindness, and love. Because Sarah Rodriguez had one final secret that would change the Patterson family forever, a secret she was carefully waiting for the right moment to reveal, a secret that would prove that sometimes the smallest people can make the biggest difference in the world. 6 months had passed since the pool incident, and Sarah's condition was worsening despite the best medical care money could buy. The experimental gene therapy had slowed the progression, but Dr. Harrison's latest tests revealed the harsh truth: Sarah's heart was failing faster than they could repair it. "We need to discuss more aggressive options," Dr. Harrison told James and Tom during a private consultation while Sarah underwent another round of tests. "There's a new procedure in Germany, experimental cardiac regeneration using stem cells. But it's risky, and Sarah's current condition makes her a borderline candidate." James didn't hesitate. "What do we need to do?" "The success rate is only 30%, and the procedure itself could kill her. Without it, she has maybe 6 months. With it—" Dr. Harrison paused. "She could have years, or she could die on the operating table." Tom's weathered hands shook as he processed the impossible choice. His daughter, his brave little girl, was running out of time, and all the money in the world couldn't guarantee a miracle. Meanwhile, at Lincoln Elementary, the changes in Tommy had become impossible to ignore. The boy who'd once thrown tantrums over minor inconveniences now helped struggling classmates with their homework, shared his lunch daily with children who had less, and had started a book drive for the school library using his own allowance. "Tommy's become a natural leader," Mrs. Williams told James during a parent-teacher conference. "But he's also carrying a heavy burden for such a young child. He talks constantly about Sarah, about making sure she's not too tired, about protecting her from other children's questions. He's appointed himself her guardian angel." That evening, James found Tommy in Sarah's room, reading to her from one of their favorite adventure books. Sarah was propped up on pillows, her breathing labored, but her eyes were bright with attention as Tommy animated different voices for each character. "Are you feeling better today?" Tommy asked during a break in the story, his voice filled with the kind of hope that broke James's heart. "Some days are harder than others," Sarah said honestly, a wisdom about suffering that no 7-year-old should possess. "But you make all the days better, Tommy." "I won't let anything happen to you," Tommy declared with fierce determination. "Daddy has the best doctors, and we'll keep fighting until you're all better." James watched from the doorway as Sarah's expression grew sad, as if she knew something Tommy didn't. That night, she asked to speak with James privately. "Mr. Patterson," she said, her small voice serious, "I need to tell you something important about Tommy, about what happens if—" She couldn't finish the sentence, but James understood. "Sarah, you don't need to worry about—" "Yes, I do." Her interruption was gentle but firm. "Tommy thinks money can fix everything because that's all he's ever known, but some things can't be bought. When I'm gone, he'll need to learn that love doesn't die just because people do." James felt tears threatening as this remarkable child spoke about her own mortality with such clarity and concern for others. "There's something else," Sarah continued, reaching under her pillow for a worn notebook. "I've been writing letters. For Tommy. For when he's older and might forget the things we talked about." As James opened the notebook and saw pages of careful 7-year-old handwriting filled with profound thoughts about kindness, courage, and what it meant to be a good person, He realized that Sarah Rodriguez was teaching them all lessons that would last long beyond her brief life. But what Sarah didn't know was that James had already made the decision about Germany, and time was running out faster than any of them imagined. News of Sarah's worsening conditions spread through Lincoln Elementary like wildfire, and the response shocked everyone, including James Patterson. Children who barely had enough for themselves began bringing quarters and dollar bills to school, determined to help Tommy's friend get better. Mrs. Williams organized a school-wide fundraiser, not knowing that money wasn't the issue. "We want to help Sarah," she explained to James when he came to pick up Tommy. "These children may not have much, but they have huge hearts." The sight of dozens of children contributing their lunch money, their allowances, their birthday dollars to help Sarah moved James in ways his wealth never had. A little girl named Maria gave her only $5, money she'd been saving for months to buy her mother a birthday present. A boy named David donated his entire piggy bank, $37 in coins, explaining that Sarah helped me with math when I was scared to ask the teacher. "We can't take their money," Tom protested when James told him about the fundraiser. "These families need every dollar they have." But James had a different idea. "What if we take their donations and use them for something Sarah would love? Something that helps other children?" That weekend, James took Sarah and Tommy to the children's ward at Boston Children's Hospital, where they used the school's donations to buy books, games, and art supplies for young patients. Sarah, despite her wheelchair and oxygen tank, lit up as she handed out gifts to children fighting their own battles against serious illnesses. "This is better than any medicine, isn't it?" she whispered to a little boy, recovering from surgery, giving him a stuffed animal bought with her classmates' quarters. Tommy watched his friend with growing understanding. She was sick, maybe dying, but she was using her remaining energy to help others. It was a lesson about purpose that no amount of privilege could have taught him. Meanwhile, Margaret had been watching these developments with growing unease. Her weekly dinners with Tommy had become exercises in listening to stories about Sarah, about the fundraiser, about Tommy's plans to make sure Sarah never feels alone. "James, this has gone too far," she confronted him after Tommy excitedly told her about their hospital visit. "You're letting a dying child dictate our son's entire life. What happens when she dies? Tommy will be devastated." "Maybe devastation isn't the worst thing," James replied quietly. "Maybe learning that some losses are worth the pain is exactly what Tommy needs to learn. You're gambling with our child's emotional well-being for the sake of playing savior to the groundskeeper's daughter." But that night, Margaret made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. She showed up at the guest house with a casserole she'd actually cooked herself, the first time she'd been in a kitchen in years. "I wanted to bring dinner," she told a stunned Tom and Sarah, "and to apologize. I've been difficult about this situation." As she sat in the modest kitchen, watching Sarah slowly eat the soup she'd made, Margaret began to understand what James and Tommy had discovered. This wasn't charity or pity. This was love, pure and simple, the kind that didn't calculate cost or benefit. "Mrs. Patterson," Sarah said quietly, "thank you for sharing Tommy with us. He's the best friend I've ever had." For the first time in months, Margaret felt her carefully constructed walls beginning to crumble. But what she didn't know was that Dr. Harrison had called James that morning with urgent news about Germany. They had to make the decision about surgery within 48 hours. Time was running out, and Sarah's secret was about to change everything they thought they knew about courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of family. The decision about Germany weighed heavily on everyone's minds, but it was Sarah who made the choice that surprised them all. On a quiet Sunday morning, she asked James, Tom, Tommy, and even Margaret to gather in the guest house living room for what she called an important family meeting. "I've been thinking about the surgery in Germany," she began, her voice steady despite her obvious fatigue. "And I've decided I don't want to go." Tom's face went white. "Sarah, sweetheart, you don't understand. This could save your life." "I understand more than you think, Daddy." Sarah pulled out her worn notebook, the one she'd shown James weeks earlier. "I've been writing letters to Tommy for when I'm gone, but I realized I need to write letters to all of you." She opened to a page marked with a pressed flower Tommy had given her. "This is for you, Daddy. I wrote about how proud I am that you work so hard to make beautiful things grow, and how you taught me that the most important gardens are the ones we plant in people's hearts." Tom's tears came freely as Sarah continued reading her father's letter, thanking him for showing her that dignity came from how you treated others, not from how much money you had. She turned another page. "Mrs. Patterson, I wrote this for you. I know you think I took your family away, but I think maybe I helped you find them again." Margaret listened in stunned silence as Sarah read words of forgiveness and understanding that no adult could have written with such grace. "And Tommy," Sarah's voice grew stronger, "I wrote you the most letters because you're going to live the longest and do the most good in the world." She read letter after letter about being brave when you're scared, about helping people who can't help themselves, about remembering that every person has value regardless of their bank account. Each letter was a lesson wrapped in love, wisdom that would guide Tommy long after Sarah was gone. "But why don't you want the surgery?" James asked, his voice thick with emotion. "Because I've been watching all of you for months now, and I've realized something important. You don't need me to get better to learn these lessons. You've already learned them. Tommy's already becoming the man he's supposed to be." She paused, looking around at each face. "The surgery is scary and might not work, but even if I die tomorrow, I'll have lived long enough to see Tommy's daddy become a father who puts love before money, to see my daddy treated with the respect he's always deserved, and to see Mrs. Patterson discover that being rich in love is better than just being rich." "Ah, Sarah, you can't give up," Tommy pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "I'm not giving up, Tommy. I'm choosing how to spend the time I have left. I want to spend it here, with our family, making more memories instead of being scared in a hospital far away." But Sarah wasn't finished. She had one more letter, one she'd written but never planned to read aloud. "There's something else I need to tell all of you," she said, her voice growing quiet. "Something I've been keeping secret because I didn't want to hurt anybody." She opened to the final page of her notebook where she'd written in her careful 7-year-old handwriting, "The day I saved Tommy from drowning, I wasn't thinking about being brave or heroic. I was thinking about my mama." Tom's face went pale. Sarah rarely mentioned her mother, who died when Sarah was just 3 years old. "My mama drowned when I was little, trying to save another child who fell into a river. I barely remember her, but Daddy told me she didn't hesitate, didn't think about the danger. She just jumped in because that's what love does." The room fell completely silent as Sarah's revelation hit them all. "When I saw Tommy in the water, I heard Daddy's voice telling me about Mama, and I knew what she would want me to do. I jumped in because I wanted to be like her, to save someone the way she tried to save that other child." James felt his world shift as he understood the full depth of Sarah's sacrifice. She hadn't just saved Tommy's life. She'd honored her mother's memory by choosing love over safety, courage over fear. But Sarah's final secret was still coming, and it would change everything they thought they knew about the little girl who'd brought them all together. Sarah's hands trembled as she turned to the very last page of her notebook, where she'd written something in pencil so light it was barely visible. This was the secret she'd carried alone for months, the truth that explained everything about her courage, her wisdom, and her impossible maturity. "There's one more thing I need to tell you," she whispered, her voice so quiet everyone had to lean forward to hear. "About the day I saved Tommy. about why I really wasn't afraid. She took a shaky breath, looking directly at James. Mr. Patterson, I knew I was dying before that day at the pool. The room fell deadly silent. Tom's face went ashen. Sarah, what do you mean? Tom asked, his voice breaking. I heard you talking to Dr. Martinez at the clinic 3 months before the pool accident. You thought I was sleeping in the chair, but I was listening. He told you my heart was getting worse, that we couldn't afford the treatments I needed, and that. She couldn't finish the sentence. James felt the floor drop away beneath him. You knew you were dying and you still jumped in the pool. That's why I jumped in, Sarah said simply. I knew my time was short anyway, but Tommy's time was just beginning, it seemed like a fair trade. Tom buried his face in his hands, overwhelmed by his daughter's revelation. All this time, he'd thought her bravery came from childish innocence. Instead, it had come from the most mature understanding of sacrifice imaginable. But there's more, Sarah continued, her voice growing stronger. After Mr. Patterson started paying for my treatment, after the gene therapy began working, I realized something. I wasn't just saved from drowning that day. I was saved for a reason. She looked around at each of them. I was saved to teach Tommy how to be good, to help his daddy remember what really matters, to show Mrs. Patterson that love doesn't have to cost anything, and to give my daddy the respect and security he's always deserved but never had. Margaret, who had been silent through the entire revelation, finally spoke. You planned this, all of it. You've been orchestrating your own legacy. Not planned exactly, Sarah said. But when I realized God was giving me extra time, I wanted to use it for something important. Tommy was going to grow up thinking money could solve everything, that people like us didn't matter. Now he knows better. She turned to Tommy, who was crying openly. That's why I don't want the surgery in Germany. I've already done what I was meant to do. You're going to grow up to be a man who helps people, who remembers that everyone has value. That's worth more than any amount of extra time for me. But James wasn't ready to accept her decision. Sarah, you can't choose to die, not when we have a chance to save you. I'm not choosing to die, Mr. Patterson. I'm choosing how to live the time I have left. She handed Tommy a special envelope from her notebook. This is my last letter to you, Tommy. But don't read it until you're grown up and maybe feeling lost or sad. It will remind you of everything we learned together. As Tommy clutched the letter to his chest, Sarah made one final announcement that would shock them all. I have one last request. When I die, I want you to do something that will help other children like me. Not just rich children who can afford the best doctors, but all children. I want my death to mean something. James looked at this remarkable 7-year-old who had taught them all about courage, sacrifice, and love, and realized that Sarah Rodriguez had been planning not just her legacy, but theirs as well. But what she asked them to do next would test everything she'd taught them about the true meaning of family. The next morning brought devastating news that would test everyone's resolve. Dr. Harrison called with the results of Sarah's latest tests. Her heart function had declined dramatically overnight. Without immediate intervention, she had days, not weeks. The Germany option is now off the table, Dr. Harrison explained during an emergency meeting at the hospital. Sarah's too weak for surgery. We can make her comfortable, but... The unfinished sentence hung in the air like a death sentence. That afternoon, the Patterson estate became a sanctuary of quiet activity. Sarah, propped up in the guest house living room with pillows and blankets, held court like a small queen receiving her subjects. Mrs. Williams arrived with cards from every student at Lincoln Elementary. Mrs. O'Brien brought homemade Irish soda bread, Sarah's new favorite. Even the estate's security team stopped by to pay their respects to the little girl who had touched everyone's lives. But it was Margaret's presence that surprised everyone most. She'd been coming daily, sometimes just sitting quietly while Sarah rested, other times helping Tom with household tasks. The former socialite was learning to cook, to clean, to care for someone else without expecting anything in return. "Why are you doing this?" Tom asked her one evening as they washed dishes together while James read to the children in the living room. "Because she saved my family too," Margaret said quietly. "Not just Tommy from drowning, but all of us from drowning in our own selfishness and isolation." As Sarah's condition worsened, Tommy refused to leave her side. He read to her constantly, told her stories about their future adventures when she got better, though they both knew she wouldn't, and made sure she was never alone. "Tommy," Sarah said during one of their quiet moments together, "I need you to promise me something." "Anything," Tommy said immediately. "When I'm gone, I need you to take care of everyone else. Your daddy will be sad and might forget to eat or sleep properly. Mrs. Patterson is just learning how to love without conditions. And my daddy. He's going to be lost without me." Tommy, wise beyond his 8 years now, nodded solemnly. "I promise. But Sarah, what if I forget the things you taught me?" "You won't forget," Sarah said with certainty. "Besides, I wrote them all down for you. And every time you help someone who can't help themselves, every time you choose kindness over being right, every time you remember that people matter more than things, that's when you'll hear my voice reminding you." That evening, James called another family meeting, this time including Elena Rodriguez, who had become like a grandmother to both children, and Mrs. O'Brien, whose Irish prayers had become a daily comfort. "Sarah asked us to do something meaningful after. When she's gone," James began, his voice steady despite his breaking heart, "I want to hear from everyone about how we can honor her memory." The conversation that followed revealed the depth of Sarah's impact on each person. Eleanor suggested a scholarship fund for children from working families. Mrs. O'Brien wanted to establish a garden at the children's hospital where families could find peace. Margaret, surprising everyone, proposed creating a foundation that would provide both medical care and emotional support for families facing childhood illness. But it was Tommy who had the idea that made Sarah's eyes light up with joy. "What if we built a school?" he said excitedly. "A school where kids like Sarah and kids like me could learn together, where it doesn't matter how much money your family has." Sarah clapped her hands weakly, her face glowing with happiness. "Yes, a school where everyone learns that people are people, no matter what." "The Sarah Rodriguez Academy," James said immediately. "We'll build it here, on the estate. The best teachers, full scholarships for children who need them, and every student will learn about kindness and courage along with math and reading." But as they planned Sarah's legacy, none of them knew that she had one final surprise, one last lesson that would transform their understanding of what it truly meant to be a family. The end was coming quickly now, and Sarah Rodriguez had one final gift to give them all. 3 days before Sarah Rodriguez passed away, she asked everyone to gather one last time in the guest house living room. Her breathing was labored now, and she could barely sit up without help, but her eyes held the same bright intelligence that had captivated them all from the beginning. "I have one final secret," she whispered, her voice so weak that Tommy had to hold her hand to give her strength. "Something I've never told anyone, not even Daddy." She pulled out a folder from under her pillow, different from her notebook of letters, thicker and more carefully organized. Tom's eyes widened as he recognized his daughter's meticulous handwriting covering dozens of pages. "The day I saved Tommy wasn't the first time I saw him at the pool," Sarah began, her words coming slowly but with purpose. "I'd been watching him for weeks from the pool house window while Daddy worked. I saw how lonely he was, how angry. I saw Mrs. Patterson visit and leave without really seeing him. I saw Mr. Patterson work in his office while his little boy played alone. James felt his heart stop. Sarah, what are you saying? I'm saying that when Tommy fell in the pool, part of me wondered if this was meant to happen. Not the accident, I would never want that. But the chance to save him, to bring all of you together. She opened the folder with trembling fingers, revealing pages of careful observations, drawings, and what looked like a detailed plan. I wrote down everything I noticed about your family, about how much you all needed each other, but didn't know how to connect. When Dr. Martinez told Daddy about my heart, when I knew my time was short, I started planning how to use whatever time I had left to fix your family. Margaret gasped, understanding dawning on her face. You orchestrated all of this, the rescue, bringing us together. Not orchestrated, Sarah corrected gently. I couldn't make Tommy fall in the pool. That was a real accident. But once it happened, yes, I knew it was my chance to do something that mattered. She turned a page, revealing detailed notes about each family member's needs and weaknesses. Mr. Patterson needed to remember that love was more important than money. Tommy needed to learn that people who have less aren't worth less. Mrs. Patterson needed to discover that being needed was better than being envied. And my daddy, he needed to know his own worth. Tom stared at his 7-year-old daughter in amazement. Sarah, how did you understand all this? Because when you know you're going to die young, you pay attention to what really matters. I watched, I listened, and I learned. And then I planned. She pulled out the final section of her folder, architectural drawings that looked almost professional, despite being done in colored pencils. This is my real final gift, she said, her voice growing stronger with excitement. Not just the idea for a school, but the complete plan. I drew every classroom, every playground, every garden. I wrote down exactly how it should work. The drawings were breathtaking. Sarah had designed a school that was part traditional classroom, part community center, part healing garden. There were spaces for children of all abilities, quiet rooms for those who needed peace, and open areas where families from different backgrounds could come together. Look at this page, she said, pointing to a detailed drawing of the main building. I designed it so the rich kids and the poor kids share everything, lockers, lunch tables, study groups. No one gets special treatment because everyone gets special treatment. James studied the plans with growing amazement. These weren't the drawings of a dying child making a wish. They were the blueprints of someone who truly understood how to change the world, one relationship at a time. And this, Sarah continued, pointing to another page, is the Sarah Rodriguez Foundation. Not just for medical research, but for helping families like mine afford the care they need while keeping their dignity intact. The foundation plan was as detailed as the school design. Sarah had thought through everything, how to identify families in need, how to provide help without shame, how to create a network of support that would last long after she was gone. But the most important part, she said, turning to the final page, is this. It was a simple drawing of all of them together. James, Tommy, Margaret, Tom, Elena, Mrs. O'Brien, even Mrs. Williams from school. They were standing in front of the school Sarah had designed, but they weren't just standing together. They were holding hands, forming a circle that seemed to extend beyond the edges of the paper. This is what I wanted to create, Sarah whispered. Not just a school or a foundation, but a family, a real family that includes everyone who needs love and gives everyone a chance to matter. Tommy was crying openly now. Sarah, you did it. You saved all of us. No, Tommy, I just showed you how to save each other. 2 days later, on a peaceful Tuesday morning with golden sunlight streaming through the guest house windows, Sarah Rodriguez passed away in her sleep, surrounded by everyone who loved her. Her final words, whispered to Tommy the night before, were simple. Remember to be brave, remember to be kind, and remember that love never really dies. 6 months after Sarah's funeral, ground was broken on the Sarah Rodriguez Academy. The ceremony was attended by hundreds of people, not just Boston's elite, whom James had expected, but families from Lincoln Elementary, former patients from the Children's Hospital, and community members who had heard Sarah's story and been inspired to contribute. Tommy, now 8 years old, spoke at the groundbreaking with a wisdom that amazed everyone who heard him. Sarah taught me that being rich isn't about having money. It's about making other people's lives better. This school will make sure every kid learns what she taught me, that we're all in this together. Margaret and James, who had remarried 6 months after Sarah's death, stood together with Tom Rodriguez, who now served as the head of facilities for both the Patterson estate and the new academy. Their family had been reformed around the lessons a 7-year-old girl had taught them about love, sacrifice, and the true meaning of wealth. And in the school's main hallway, in a place of honor where every student would see it daily, hung Sarah's final drawing, the circle of connected hands, with a plaque that read, "Sarah Rodriguez, age 7. She saved a drowning boy and taught the world that the smallest people can make the biggest difference." The Sarah Rodriguez Foundation would go on to help thousands of families afford medical care while maintaining their dignity. The academy would educate children from all backgrounds together, creating generations of leaders who understood that privilege comes with responsibility. But perhaps most importantly, Sarah's letters continued to guide Tommy Patterson as he grew up, reminding him that true heroism isn't about grand gestures. It's about choosing kindness over comfort, courage over safety, and love over everything else. Sarah Rodriguez had jumped into that pool to save one little boy's life. In the end, she had saved them all, creating ripples of love and compassion that would spread far beyond anything she could have imagined in her brief but extraordinary 7 years of life. And every year on the anniversary of the day she saved Tommy, the entire academy would gather to read one of Sarah's letters aloud, ensuring that her voice and her lessons about what it truly means to be rich in the things that matter would echo through generations to come.